What's it say to?
By staying in the meeting, you consent to being recorded. Got it. There you go.
Hey everyone, hope everyone is doing well this evening.
How about that timing?
This is the I think 16th, 17th session of the Canadian Foreign Policy Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, a weekly show on all things Canadian foreign policy. And I'm coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And in the latter part, we're going to have I think, quite an interesting discussion with Professor Ivan Katchanovski about Canada-Ukraine. But to begin with, I thought I would just talk about a few developments in Canadian foreign policy this week quickly. Israel raided the offices of 7 different Palestinian civil society organizations a few days ago. The 16 countries of the EU countries the next day, or I guess maybe it was later that day, I think it was overnight the raiding took place. They attended a meeting with some of the representatives of those Palestinian groups to display a bit of solidarity. Far from the solidarity that the EU countries should be giving to Palestinians, but a small little gesture. Canada's representative to the Palestinian Authority was not even there. And the Canadian government finally put out a statement about something that's been widely condemned by the UN, Amnesty International, many, many groups. And the statement said they were going to ask Israel for more information on what happened, kind of implying that maybe Israel has secret information about these groups being, terrorist fronts or whatnot. So one more in a long list of Canada basically enabling Israel's violence and dispossession against Palestinians. Just before coming on here, I saw an article in Canadian Dimension that is worth checking out. It's from Owen Chalk on saying on the top 40 Canadian mining companies' profits in 2021, which was $143 billion. And in the article, he shows how many of these companies' operations are international. Some of them don't even have operations in Canada, but they're listed or listed on Canadian Stock Exchange or the offices here. And he shows that, so they've been just extracting huge amounts of wealth from Latin America, Africa, to a lesser extent, Asia. And in the article, he points out that sum of money is more than 50 African countries, full GDP for the entire nation. So we're talking about a really huge amount of wealth extraction that Canadian mining companies. This is not a surprise. We knew this, but this is just putting a bit of a number on this. And this is just the 40 biggest. There are many, many dozens, probably hundreds more involved, Canadian mining companies involved in extraction, often internationally. Another thing I wanted to mention briefly is the firing of, or the non-contract renewal, I guess, of Lisa Laflamme. I believe it was a firing because her contract, I think, had a couple years left. And this is a kind of an interesting story in that, like, clearly this is sexism, crass sexism. If you contrast how they treated her to the previous main anchor on the CTV News. And there's all kinds of stories coming out about, the fact her hair was going gray and she's a 58-year-old woman, and how this was, kind of out of bounds, according to a certain sexist attitude. And also there's just a corporate kind of interference. But what I found kind of troubling in some of the progressives' commentary on Lisa Laflamme being turfed was they acted like she was some sort of like great light of I don't know, of progressivism or journalism or whatever. Well, Lisa Laflamme, and I haven't had the time to do a deep dive, but I've sort of passively paid attention to this over the past couple decades. She was somebody who was repeatedly embedded with Canadian military in Afghanistan. She was, she does blurbs of these real militaristic books about Canada's role in Afghanistan, and she was an international affairs correspondent. You look at her comments on Iraq war and people like Christiane Amanpour from CNN. And this was somebody who was a echo of Ottawa and Washington's perspective. And that's in part how she became a top journalist, is by being very much close to the establishment perspective on international affairs. And even in fact, one of her disputes apparently with CTV management was over how much resources was going to be devoted to covering the Queen's Jubilee. And they didn't, I guess the money people at CTV didn't want to spend the money to dispatch a crew to London to cover that. And also over how much resources to put into covering Ukraine. And this is not in any way to side with the corporate types at Bell, but this is, Lisa Laflamme's sort of worldview is not one of a progressive kind of outlook. And yes, condemn the sexism, condemn the corporate interference, but we don't need to go any further in sort of holding her up as some sort of important figure of progressivism or whatnot. And it's also, there's another kind of underlying element that I don't say this with total confidence, but it is a general kind of point. I think it applies here. Is there's a sort of history of Canadian, certainly in reporters and journalists, but also kind of some in the more the political field, where they kind of make a name for themselves internationally. And invariably, when they're making a name for themselves internationally, it's advancing Ottawa, Washington's perspective. And the fact that they can sort of like become like widely viewed as widely sympathetic when they're doing international affairs speaks to how there isn't really dissent on international affairs. And I think the clearest example of this is Stephen Lewis, who I've written about this on a number of occasions, how he was actually quite a controversial figure on the left, even on the left. He was viewed as a sort of right-wing NDPer. And then he goes and gets involved in international affairs. And I'm not going to get into all that. That's a long, big story. And then he gets a sort of like positive glow across the political spectrum. And it speaks to how, we sort of, on foreign policy issues, is really like one version. There's not, the debate and dissent and disagreement like there is on lots of domestic issues. Certainly not enough on domestic issues of that debate and dissent, but substantially more than on international affairs. Another issue I thought I just mentioned briefly was that this was the 23rd, I guess the 24th anniversary of the US bombing of the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, when Clinton bombed this factory that produced something like 90% of Sudan's pharmaceutical drugs, including, most importantly, the quinine, the malaria drug. And it's thought that thousands, I think even tens of thousands of people died as a result of the destruction of the country's pharmaceutical drug supply. And I think one person was killed in the direct bombing, and then a dozen or so injured. So directly, but indirectly, there was huge numbers that died as a result of the destruction of the medical facilities. And U.S. Secretary of State said, "We have a legal right to self-defense." Canada's foreign minister really echoed Madeleine Albright in saying, when he said, quote, "When you come into this very murky and very dangerous area of dealing with terrorism, nations have a right to defend themselves." So again, the Americans bombing the pharmaceutical factory was defending themselves. And Jean Chrétien also made a similar type statement. Also, we had the anniversary of the U.S. and British coup against Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran. and in large part in response to him nationalizing the British Petroleum, or the predecessor to British Petroleum, the British Oil Company. And Canada was the Pearson government passively supported that coup. They criticized Mossadegh for nationalizing oil. There's all kinds of disparaging remarks that were made, including by Lester Pearson and other Canadian officials towards Mossadegh, and this was really the destruction of Iranian democracy. And after the coup, they refused to set up diplomatic relations with Mossadegh's government, but after the coup, they set up diplomatic relations pretty soon. So passive Canadian support something that's actually had quite immense political ramifications over the years. So now I'm going to watch just a quick video of a disruption today. Well, not disruption, but a sort of a handful of us protested Trudeau and Olaf Scholz. It was, I think, 4 of us. A couple of people might be on the session here, and just challenged. The police were pretty aggressive, and it was difficult to get very close. But just to challenge Trudeau on NATO, on opposing negotiations, peace negotiations regarding Ukraine, and basically Canada seeing Ukraine and the war there as sort of a proxy war against Russia. Anyways, the video's not that good. So, maybe.
You Trudeau for fueling the war. It's call for peace. No NATO. No NATO. Shame on you, Trudeau, for fueling the war. No NATO. Shame on you, Trudeau, for fueling the war. Stop fueling. Call for peace. Call for peace negotiations. Shame on you, Trudeau. Shame on you, Liberal government. Stop expansionists. Stop expansionist NATO policies. Shame on you, Trudeau. Call for negotiation. Stop using Ukraine as a proxy in your war against Russia. No NATO. No NATO, Trudeau.
So
for peace. No NATO.
So we weren't. I actually went down earlier in the day. He had a press conference that I found out about last minute down at the Science Center. Tried to put forward some perspective there, but that wasn't able to get close. But yeah, so I think that I think we obviously need a lot more dissent on this issue, and the police were quite aggressive today. Wasn't able to get very close to Trudeau, and the other people who arrived earlier were physically moved by the police from the public space. But so. Jumping into the discussion about Ukraine and Canada's proxy war, the National Post reported a couple days ago that Canada's been the 4th biggest weapons contributor in the last couple months to Ukraine after Poland, the US, and UK. So that was kind of an interesting. I didn't know that's not surprising, but it goes with what we kind of knew about what's going on. Obviously, we've talked about the Canadian Special Forces on the ground. We have the restarting of Operation Unifier, the training of Ukrainian forces that's now going to be taking place in the UK, and I think that we have to see this. I consider this an illegal Russian invasion. Very brutal. It needs to stop. So that's, that's clear, but we also have to see the other side, and specifically, the most importantly from our perspective here in Canada, is how Canada's contributed to this this horror that's taking place. And I think that it really is a 7-year proxy war that Canada's been involved in. So with its training, while there's been fighting in the east of Ukraine, Canada's been training Ukrainian forces, providing all kinds of assistance to Ukrainian forces fighting against a force that's been in large part backed by Moscow. So on that note, I thought I would bring in University of Ottawa professor and Ivan Katchanovski, who is done all kinds of great digging and research and really serious kind of rigorous analysis of what's going on, and specifically around 2014 and the Maidan protests. And of course, he's a voice that gets a little bit of play in the corporate media, but mostly his perspective is because it doesn't go along with the Canadian government perspective, is not is not getting on CBC The National or the big program. So first of all, thanks for coming on, Ivan. And I just want to get right into it, which is where do you see things going?
Thank you for the invitation. I actually gave interviews to CBC National, but only brief part of my interviews were shown by CBC National. And I also gave a lot of interviews to media around the world, but obviously media narratives and media coverage of the war in Ukraine is dominated by people who are not experts in this conflict, people who have various stakes in various military companies or involved in think tanks which are linked to partisan interests and have no interest in actually discovering and telling people about what actually going on in Ukraine. So I am doing the research as part of my academic project about a war in Ukraine, which is taking place right now after the Russian invasion, and I'm going to be presenting my paper based on this study at the annual meeting of American Political Science Association in Montreal next month. So this is just illustration that I try to give my academic perspective based on my research as an expert on Ukraine and on this conflict in particular.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the nuance that you bring to the issue is something that's just not considered acceptable in the dominant media, or maybe around the margins you can have a little bit, but to actually fully provide you some sort of latitude to explain some of the context in 2014 and whatnot. And I do want to get to that. I want to actually delve right into 2014 in a substantive way, because I know you've done sort of some of the most important research on that. But before that, I wanted to just get your sense of where you think things are going. Like, for instance, with Russia annexing the parts of, and it seems pretty clear that the Donbass, but also parts of the South. And also, like, do you think that Russia's going to go all the way to try to get Odessa? And if they are or aren't, is that going to be because they don't think that they're not in a military position to do so, or if that's because they see other sort of political problems, lack of support on the ground, or other questions like that. But so I guess it's a big question, but sort of like, where do you sort of see the war going? I mean, we're 6 months in now. This is in 2 days, the 6-month anniversary. And from my perspective, this looks like this is going to go on for a long time, unfortunately. And I just want to.
Yes, you are correct. The war is already taking place for almost 6 months, and there is no sense or expectation actually when it would be, when actually it would end, because there are no negotiations, and currently there are no major developments from a military point of view. Russia was able to capture a large part of eastern Ukraine, in particular in Donbass, and part of Kharkiv region, and part of also of the Zaporizhia region. And also it was managed to capture almost the entire Kherson region in the south of Ukraine. And the question is if Russia would be willing and actually to spend their military resources, in particular also lives of their military personnel, to advance to other regions of Ukraine, in particular to Odessa, which is very important from a political standpoint, but also from a military standpoint. And also if Russia would be willing to try to capture Kharkiv, which is a second largest city in Ukraine and near Russian border, or if Russia would want to go and capture other regions in eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine in particular, and big cities which are located near Kherson and Zaporizhia, in particular Zaporizhia city, Kryvyi Rog and Dnipropetrovsk. So this is a big question, which is again very difficult to see if Putin would be willing to devote such resources, because currently he relies on use of regular military force and did not declare any general mobilization in contrast to Ukraine. But obviously Russia plans now to annex regions which it already captured, and in particular not only Donbass but also Kherson, Zaporizhia, and like the Kharkiv region. And there is no sense or expectation when the war would end currently, because both Ukrainian government under President Zelensky and the Russian government and the also Western governments declare that it's possible for each party of this conflict to win this war. But I think it will be very difficult for Ukraine to win this war, because it is not able to match military might of Russia. And Russia still has much bigger advantage from a military point of view, not in terms of military personnel, but in terms of weapons, in particular heavy artillery and multiple rocket launchers, which Russia uses with devastating effect in Ukraine. And just today there was an announcement that by the Ukrainian military supreme commander of armed forces of Ukraine that almost 9,000 of Ukrainian military members were killed. And I think this is just minimum estimate, because there are also a lot of people who are missing and they were killed but missing. And the same if you look into Russian casualties, there are estimates from BBC which counted reports of individual Russian soldiers and other volunteers and so on who were killed in Ukraine, and they are now estimated at 5,700. And in addition to this, there are very heavy casualties from separatist forces in Donbass. And the official number of people who are killed in Donbass, including all the military personnel and all other police and so on, now stands in Donetsk separatist republic stands at 2,700. 2,800. And if you take into account Luhansk separatist republic, this would also make a total of around 4,500, which is again very heavy casualties in this region. And they are actually, and this also shows that in addition to conventional war between Russia and Ukraine, which Russia started without any justification and which is illegal under international law, there is also a civil war which is still going on in Ukraine, even so it's much less now important than Russia-Ukraine war, and much less important than a proxy war between the West and Russia in Ukraine. And I think this is big tragedy for Ukraine because of all this conflict simultaneously taking place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, the really grim perspective is that from Russia's perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, if Ukraine is going to be viewed as a hostile state on its border, Russia, again, not from a moral or even economic perspective, from a strictly geopolitical perspective, it has an interest in Ukraine being weak, divided. You know, if you're gonna be hostile on its border, then it has an interest in weakness. So seems to me from Russia's perspective that Ukraine being divided, taking big chunks of the territory that's the most economically valuable, it seems, has a certain logic to it. It's a grim logic, but it has a logic to it. But so, like, from the standpoint of, like, Russia not taking Kharkiv, is that, I mean, it's mostly from your perspective that they don't think that they can do so without just destroying the place. Is that because like one of the things like I try to get my head around, I think that, like, when it comes to the Donbass, my sense is, the maybe the majority, I don't know the numbers, but significant proportion of the population is fine with being part of Russia. Certainly enough of the population is either supportive or okay with being part of Russia that they're not going to resist in any sort of significant way. With Kherson, it seems like that may be the case as well. I don't know if that holds for Odessa. I don't know if that holds for Kharkiv. I assume that's part of Russia's calculation in how they're pursuing their warfare, and that, if you want to take a place, you want to take a place because you can, keep control of the place. So yeah, do you think that specifically with regards to Kharkiv, do you think that holds in terms of that they just don't think they can take it without destroying the place, and then if they destroy the place, then what's the point of taking it? Or
I think that the original plan by Russia, when Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, was to have a regime change in Kiev. And that's why Russia deployed their military forces around the Kiev from Belarus, from the north of Kiev capital. But they had no intention to capture Kiev because the number of Russian military was not sufficient to do this, to capture such large city. And I think the same applies to Kharkiv. Kharkiv is second largest city in Ukraine, and current Russian forces, along with separatists, would not be able to match, such a large city and to capture such a large city without heavy destruction. And even if they wanted to do this, it would be, again, very long time and very difficult task for Russia from a Russian perspective, because Mariupol showed how a city can be destroyed, and even so, Mariupol is much smaller than Kharkiv. So I think that for this reason, there is no sign yet that Russia plans to capture Kharkiv, or it would try to capture Kharkiv definitely, because it will be very difficult and with a lot of casualties for Russia. But I think if they wanted to take cities like Odessa and Kharkiv, they would not capture them, they would surrender them or try to surrender them, like they did with Mariupol and other cities like Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. They would surrender them and then would basically slowly try to capture. And they might do this without actually repeating what they did with Mariupol. But I think, again, it will be very difficult for them to do this. And from a perspective of popular support for Russia annexation of these regions, I actually conducted a survey research on this topic in Ukraine after the Maidan, and I also published my dissertation on this topic. So regions in the east, including Kharkiv, and regions in Odessa, including region in the south of Ukraine, including Odessa, can be classified as pro-Russian. But this does not mean that pro-Russian means that the people would necessarily support annexation by Russia or joining Russia. And this is a very big difference, because people in this region, they supported closer ties with Russia, for instance, economic ties, cultural ties, open border, and they opposed NATO membership of Ukraine before the war with Russia. But only a small minority of people, like few percent in southern regions of Ukraine and eastern Ukraine, in regions like Kharkiv and Odessa, supported actually joining Russia. And the same holds now. But there are two major exceptions. Only in Crimea, there was overwhelming support of joining Russia in a variety of public opinion polls. And in Donbass, there was very significant support for joining Russia, close to 50% before the start of civil war there. And afterwards, there were some polls conducted by German scholars which found higher support for joining Russia. So with the exception of Donbass and Crimea, which already basically under control of Russia. And in case of Donbass, it's basically a client state of Russia. So in the case of this, in case of other regions, there is a marginal support for joining Russia and annexing Russia. And this might change to some extent as a result of war, because many people who supported Ukraine and opposed Russia, they left this region already, this places already. So in this case, people who decided to stay, they might be more willing to support Russian policy and join Russia in order to kind of as a pragmatic solution. But still, there is no overwhelming support like in Crimea, that was the case for joining Russia, or there is no significant support like it was in Donbass.
Yeah, I guess there's always the line between supporting something and being like acquiescing to something, and you know how the degree to opposition of coming under Russian control that can be fairly important in the calculations. But so yeah, I want to kind of shift gears to a question of 2014 and the Maidan protests, and could you just sort of like lay out the, you know, this went on for 3 months of protests, and you've done some research into the snipers and who was really behind people who were killed. And I want to you know understand that. Also, I think if I'm not mistaken, you covered you also talk about the early protests and some of the conflict that happened with the security forces right at the start of the protests, and how there's evidence to suggest that was sort of instigated by far right forces. Could you talk about initially about the sort of early part of the Maidan protests and then the sort of latter phase?
Yes, this is actually another my major project since I specialize in political violence and conflicts in Ukraine since the end of 1920s, which I examine a variety of conflicts and violence in Ukraine, including World War II and mass murder by, for instance, UNUPA and so on. So in the case of Maidan, Maidan started according to conventional narrative, which was presented by Western media and politicians, and also Ukrainian media and politicians, as a peaceful protest against decision by then President Viktor Yanukovych to abandon plan to sign association agreement with European Union. And this was presented basically as Ukraine joining the European Union, even so this was not the case. But more important, I analyzed this issue, the start of this Maidan, which I watched live. I was watching live this, as I did with many other cases of violence during Maidan. And what I saw basically on live broadcast and what I actually then analyzed as part of my research were very different. And this is very easy to do, basically, from a media perspective. You just can show part of what's going on and omit some other crucial part, and it looks like very different from perspective of actually what happened. So according to what I found, that this was not just police violence. When police Berkut went to Maidan Square or Independence Square in the center of Kyiv and dispersed few hundred of students, according to the media, by using violence without any provocation, by beating them and so on. And this was captured on live television, live stream television by main television channel in Ukraine at the time, which was called Inter, which actually was owned by a supporter of, by head of presidential administration of then Viktor Yanukovych. And this television channel showed this footage. And a lot of people after this, they saw this as, in the West in particular, they saw this basically as just violence, shocking violence. This was start. So people were shocked in Ukraine, and many people in the West just see police beating like people on the main square of Ukraine without any provocation, without any reason. And this was shock, which led to mass protests afterwards. But what actually happened, which was not shown by television, in particular this television channel, which was not accidentally filming this police dispersal of protesters on Maidan, because it was already 4 a.m. in the morning. So if you see main television channel on main square of Ukraine, basically just waiting for something to happen at 4 a.m., This is not what how typically media operates. And even journalist who was working with television operator from this television channel called Inter, she testified that he testified that he wanted to leave basically square because nothing was happening, but the journalist from this television channel told him to stay and to wait for something important. And this was not accidental. There is a variety of other evidence, including confessions by Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, by far-right members, which shows that Maidan opposition knew about this. They even intercepted radio communication from Berkut that police would be clear, that police would move to Maidan Square. And they knew this, but they did not inform protesters who remain on the square. And but instead they met before this, and they decided to use this for their own advantage, basically as presenting this as a violence by the police without any provocation. And so Maidan opposition knew this from advance. Before actually this happened, they evacuated from this square. Even so, they were warning from protesters that there would be it was necessary to make an announcement, but nobody did this from Maidan Square. They just evacuated Maidan stage. And then only people were left on Maidan. Again, just a few hundred people were left on Maidan, and many of them waited there specifically. So they were not just students, as actually was presented by the media. Most of people who actually were beaten and taken to hospital were people who actually were not students. They were adults, like 40 years old, like 50 years old, and many from other regions of Ukraine, and only few of them were students. And this is, again, also very important, because what happened, and I found also other videos from this first event, and which were not shown by any television channel, but I mentioned this in my peer-reviewed article, and which I analyzed. So basically, what was a very important part, when police entered Maidan Square to clear this remaining protesters, they were met by far-right activists from the right sector, far-right organization, which included neo-Nazi and radical nationalist organizations, and they started to attack police. So basically, the violence began with involvement of far right, which played a very crucial role. And then far right protesters, they left the area, and basically people who were beaten were not far right members. They were ordinary Ukrainians, but not students. So this is how it started. And this story is still not mentioned by the media. Even so, all the evidence is available, including footage of this far-right protesters attacking police with variety of tools, like throwing into them like fire and so on. And such footage available, but it's not shown by the media. And this is very common also to other events during Maidan, and also to the war which is going on right now, because again, one way to mislead people is to omit some evidence and just to present part of the story.
And so the repression, it's important for people to understand, the repression then leads to like Canadian and European and American condemnations, and it spurs the protests more. And then you even have like John Baird, Canada's foreign minister, who actually goes to Maidan Square, not long, like 2 weeks, a week, 10 days after the initial protests. And then the head of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Paul Grod, is actually like on the stage and talks about how Canada's foreign minister is there, and apparently people start chanting Canada, Canada. And then you see in like the Netflix film on the Maidan, you see like Canadian flags are actually being like flown at some of the like sort of tents that are set up. So the the instigation of violence right at the get-go has quite a significant impact on shaping the whole kind of tone of the Maidan protests, which then continue on for 3 months against Yanukovych. And then like in the latter phase where the really the killing, like huge amounts of killing takes place, you've done a whole bunch of research into like the legal cases and video evidence and all this stuff about like who actually was responsible for the killings, and the killings then provide the sort of the justification to kick out Yanukovych, who was elected, and I have a question about Yanukovych afterwards. But could you sort of then talk a little bit about the snipers and those who are sort of killed in the latter phase of the Maidan protests?
Yes, this was a crucial event, a crucial case of mass murder in Ukraine, which led ultimately to the invasion of Russia of Ukraine, to the current war, which has a devastating effect, because this had a cycle of escalation after the Maidan massacre. There was removal of Yanukovych, violent removal, but not only by blaming him for the massacre, but also there were assassinations, which were revealed also by the Ukrainian justice system. But again, nothing is reported by the media. And this is the reason why Yanukovych fled Ukraine. And after this, as a result of this violent overthrow of Yanukovych government, there was a new government in Ukraine, and Russia retaliated by annexing Crimea. And there was a start of civil war in Donbass and Russian military interventions. And finally, Russia launched an illegal invasion of Ukraine, which are still ongoing. So this is a very important event, and that's why I devoted so much attention, basically researching this, all the publicly available evidence, including evidence which was presented and publicly available from the Maidan massacre trials and investigations in Ukraine. So what I found actually lives beyond any reasonable doubt, beyond any typical standard of any academic research, which I analyzed in other cases of violence. So this is undeniable that this massacre was not perpetrated by the police or government snipers, which was universally presented by the media and by politicians in Ukraine, in the West. But this actually was, this massacre of both police and protesters, Maidan protesters, was conducted and organized by the elements of the Maidan opposition, in particular from the oligarchic party and also from far right. So this was specifically designed to blame Yanukovych and his forces in order to delegitimize them, to basically prevent them from using force and to overthrow Yanukovych. And this was a very successful case of such kind of violence, specifically used to blame opposite side. And evidence is overwhelming in this. I analyzed, for instance, video footage, which is again very possible, which is possible to synchronize perfectly from the start of the massacre until the end of the massacre. So there are hundreds and hundreds of video clips and video streams from entire massacre, which is possible to put together, basically synchronize from the start until the end of the massacre, with the exception of the very, very start, which is also very important, using Maidan stage sound and announcements from the Maidan stage. So I did this, and just such video footage, which is synchronized, shows that actually first protesters were killed before actually police, which who are charged with their murder, even appeared and started to shoot. So they obviously cannot do this. They cannot shoot any actually any protesters before actually appearing in footage and starting to shoot in the Maidan area. But they're still blamed, they're still charged with their killings. So a few protesters were killed even before police appeared. And this followed, the killing followed right after the police were killed in the same area. So that's why police appeared in the area to this footage. They analyzed them, and it's possible also to see that when police fire from their Kalashnikov rifles, assault rifles, they fire and they aim not into protesters. They fired into ground, into trees, into walls of a building. So they were shooting not to kill protesters, but they were shooting basically to prevent the advance or to make them retreat. So and because the time and direction of shooting of the police who are charged with the massacre of these protesters did not coincide with a specific time and when protesters were killed and wounded. So it's not possible basically to kill and wound without actually aiming a gun, basically a Kalashnikov and any other kind of rifle or any other firearm into direction of protester, and to see sound and to see like smoke and so on. But at the same time, there are many sounds of other gunshots when police is not shooting. So this means there were some other forces, actually other snipers who were shooting into protesters. And after massacre was already started and almost all protesters were already killed, only then government snipers appeared they were also blamed for the massacre, but they appeared after almost all protesters were killed. So again, they could not do this. They cannot travel in time. They cannot kill almost all the protesters, with just a few exceptions, with few protesters who were killed afterwards. And this is again also very important because just video shows that beyond any doubt that police did not massacre protesters or government snipers did not massacre protesters, but there were other ones, other snipers who massacred protesters. And the video footage, including the one which was shown at the Maidan massacre trial but never shown on any television, was in Canada or any other countries. It was actually that protesters were shot by snipers. There are videos of the sniper shooting into protesters. There are also testimonies during the massacre by more than 80 Maidan protesters and journalists pointing to snipers in Maidan control buildings and areas shooting into protesters. And there are also videos which show, for instance, Belgian television video which shows Maidan protesters who were massacred being led to the area of massacre, even so there was no need to go there. So they were specifically led to the area in which they were massacred in a few minutes. And this is just kind of video footage. In addition to this, there are found testimonies by more than 500 witnesses of the massacre who testify about Maidan snipers, who testify about involvement of Maidan opposition. And in addition to this, there are including testimonies by absolute majority of Maidan protesters who are wounded. So they testify that Maidan massacre trial that they are wounded by snipers in Hotel Ukraina and other Maidan controlled buildings, and not by the Berkut police on the ground in the opposite direction. So this is even my absolute majority of wounded Maidan protesters testify opposite to all this narrative which was accepted. And their testimonies are almost never shown. Even so, I have video appendix of their testimonies publicly available. In addition to this, there are many, many other eyewitness testimonies with similar testimonies about Maidan snipers, about Maidan leaders' involvement, about capture of Maidan snipers, and they are released by Maidan leaders, and that also Maidan leaders knew in advance about Maidan massacre. So all these testimonies are consistent. In addition to this, there were 14 public admissions. There were public admissions by 14 members, self-admitted members of Maidan sniper groups in Italian, Israeli, American television, and testimonies to Maidan massacre trial, in particular by former Georgian military members who testified for Ukrainian government investigation that they've received orders from Maidan leaders to massacre both police and protesters, and they witnessed such massacre, in particular by members of far right and snipers from other countries who were brought to murder protesters, including Georgians and Baltic states and so on. So in addition to this, there is forensic evidence which was conducted by government experts, ballistic experts, medical experts, and medical forensic evidence shows that protesters were shot not from the front, from horizontal direction. They were shot from very steep direction, from top to bottom direction, which is much as, and from back and from the side, left and right side, not from the front, but horizontal direction, but from direction of basically Maidan controlled buildings and areas, like Hotel Ukraina in the back and so on, or from the side. So this is, again, very important because government investigation simply denies that there were any snipers in these buildings. They did not do any investigation, which is also consistent with cover-up of Maidan massacre trial investigation, kind of snipers by investigation. And in addition to this, there was ballistic examinations which did not match bullets of Berkut, whose members are charged with the massacre, with bullets which were extracted from bodies of Maidan protesters. And some of the bullets which were extracted did not match even caliber of bullets, Kalashnikov bullets which were used by Berkut. They were of different caliber. They were from hunting type of caliber, from NATO type of weapons and rifles and so on. So this is another evidence that which are clear and consistent with the fact that they were massacred by snipers from Maidan control areas. And even government ballistic experts found in many cases that many protesters were killed from these buildings. They determined bullet trajectory pointing to buildings which were controlled by Maidan forces. And when Maidan massacre trial ordered prosecution to conduct such experiments, use ballistic experts to determine from which directions exactly protesters were shot and killed and wounded, prosecution basically refused to do this. So they simply kind of used a variety of excuses. For 2 years, they did not do any. They actually did not conduct such investigative experiments on spot to determine actually from bullet trajectories from which direction, which specific location protesters were shot and killed and wounded. And just in May of this year, Maidan massacre trial, which is still ongoing, revealed that when first such examination was being conducted with presence of defense lawyers, and government expert pointed, based on evidence which was available to him and to prosecution, to Maidan massacre trial, that this protester was shot from a building which was Hotel Ukraina, which was controlled by Maidan forces. Afterwards, prosecution basically stopped all these experiments. So this is just a revelation that kind of that they were not interested in revealing such evidence, and because this is contrary to their own interests. If they wanted to implicate Berkut or government snipers, it was very easy to do this, but actually government experts pointed into different direction. And for this reason, they just cover up all this evidence, which was not presented in the Maidan massacre trial. Instead, there was an article in New York Times about this kind of model by a New York architecture company, which kind of look into evidence of killing of just few protesters. And this evidence is fabricated. They change location of bullet wounds, which are specifically described, exactly described in forensic medical examinations, which are they publish and translate into English, and they change location of bullet wounds in order to fit them to Berkut, to make them horizontal, even so they were very steep direction from the side, which I mentioned already, or from the back. They just put this into different. So this is like basically fraud, and this is done openly without any consequences. The New York Times would not publish any kind of my letter to the editor, would not reveal anything. Even so, I know that journalists from New York Times and other media, major media, know about my research. They would never report this, obviously because of political reasons. And finally, the evidence of cover-up and stonewalling of Maidan massacre trial is also overwhelming. Evidence disappeared, like shields and helmets with bullet wounds, they just disappeared. Many bullets disappeared after Maidan massacre when they were in control of Maidan opposition or government investigation, without any trace, without any consequences. In addition to this, there was also changes and reversal of investigation and evidence and so on. Kind of new examinations, which were totally different from initial examinations, like ballistic examinations and so on. And finally, we can say that that since massacre which took place in 2014, nobody yet, not a single person is convicted or under arrest for this massacre. So there is nobody who basically was punished for this massacre in the legal sense after Maidan massacre trial, so which is still ongoing and might again could still continue, but I don't think there will be anybody who would be still convicted for this massacre. So this is another clear evidence that this was not just police or any other government forces, that this was a force which was linked to Maidan opposition, including to kind of from foreign countries, foreign snipers, and they were involved in this massacre, which had very tremendous consequences for Ukraine, and now has this effect on Russian invasion and a major kind of link to a Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is again cannot be justified by the Maidan massacre, but also Russian invasion of Ukraine does not justify and absolve people who were responsible for Maidan massacre.
And we should point out that the Canadian government was working to get rid of Yanukovych from early, back in 2010. Harper was already criticizing him just right after after Yanukovych's election, and that the Canadian press reported that the Maidan protesters actually used the Canadian embassy in Kyiv, which is right next to the square, that they used it for more than a week as a base in their protests. And I know one of your articles points out that the far right activists, I think C14 is the name of the group, actually openly talks about how they were using the Canadian embassy. I mean, the Canadian embassy, that's a clear intervention in Ukrainian sovereign affairs. That's a violation of international law to turn your embassy over to an anti-government movement. And then, especially when you learn these other details of violence and, far right maybe being involved in the sniper and killing people, all this kind of stuff. So there should really be a whole investigation into Canada's role. So I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but I just want you have any comment on Canada specifically and the far right around the Maidan protests?
So I just want to add about this group C14, which was based in, which actually was located in the Canadian embassy during the Maidan massacre. And there is admission by the leader of this group that they actually basically went into Canadian embassy and decided to stay there. So I'm not sure about Canadian government at all based on this, but because this was a decision by C14. But the reason why they went there is also very important. Because another activist from the same group, another member of leadership of the same group, after like a few years after Maidan massacre, stated in Maidan Ukrainian media that that the leader of this group C14 received information about Maidan massacre. So he knew in advance that there will be Maidan massacre, and that's why they went into Canadian embassy to wait all this, basically to stay safe during the Maidan massacre. Even so, Maidan protesters were killed. All the most radical far-right protesters, they from C14 and from the right sector, they were not present during this massacre. So they knew in advance that it would take place. So this is another evidence that they knew that this was not just government or forces or Yanukovych, that this was actually organized in advance, and they basically wanted to have a refuge and not to be killed themselves and their own members, but decided to sacrifice other Maidan protesters in order to basically overthrow Yanukovych government.
And I should say that the Canadian press also reported that the spokesperson, the Ukrainian spokesperson for the Canadian embassy, was a opposition activist who was a fairly high profile opposition activist. So the Canadian government clearly has never admitted that they like opened the doors and said, hey, come use our embassy to overthrow the government. But the fact that protesters were in the embassy for, according to the Canadian press, more than a week, and the Canadian government never did anything, didn't publicly say, demand they leave, or didn't do anything to ostensibly to kick them out, suggests the Canadian government was fine with them using their space, and I think they even used some vehicles and stuff like that in their opposition. So I wanted to get into a couple other subjects, but I don't think we have time. But do people maybe have time for like one or two questions? Are there any questions for Ivan? If there aren't any questions immediately, my other questions were sort of, what do we do, right? Like where should it go, right? Like what's the path to peace? I mean, to me, the first, you just want to, you want a certain modicum of justice, but you want to end the violence. So obviously there has to be some sort of negotiation. It appears there's some little bits of negotiation that Turkey is kind of working on with Russian and Ukrainian officials. I know the Russian I don't know who it was, Putin or it was Lavrov or someone else. Yesterday I saw a story saying that they have no contact with Western officials. Which obviously is important. You have to have some contact if you're going to have some negotiation. But yeah, what do you see as like this sort of what's the path to peace, and specifically like what should the Canadian government be doing? Obviously, the Canada's not the main player in all this, but it has a certain amount of influence and power, and at least at the rhetorical level, in my opinion, they should at least talk about negotiations. They should at least talk about peace, even if you're going to actually keep sending in weapons and you're going to keep doing the training, which I don't agree with. But even if you're going to do that, to simultaneously raise the question of we'll try to facilitate negotiations. If the Ukrainian government wants to negotiate, we will be there, and we'll Ottawa, you can come to Ottawa and have it. There's all kinds of things or support the UN. Secretary General being involved in negotiations. But so yeah, what do you think, Ivan, in terms of some of those kind of questions of like the path to peace and what anti-war Canadian activists and whatnot should be calling for?
I do not see any likelihood of negotiations very soon, because there is no willingness by any side or any party of the conflict to engage in such negotiations, in particular by Ukrainian government, by Zelensky, who openly stated that negotiations can only start with Russia after Russian defeat, basically. And which means removing or Russian forces not only from Kherson and other regions which are occupied by Russia since the start of the war, but also from Donbass, and also he declared also Crimea needs to be taken back, which is again this is almost has zero chance or close to zero chance of happening. So this means the negotiations have close to zero chance of happening. And Russia now also decided to rely on military force and is not willing to again continue negotiations. And the same applies to Western governments, which basically use Ukraine to as a proxy to fight to fight with Russia without actually sacrificing their lives of their citizens, with the exception of volunteers who voluntarily join Ukrainian forces and fight in this war. But the reason why negotiations are now not likely, I think, it is also very important because there were negotiations taking place since the start of the war in March in particular, and the negotiations were close to completion. They were quite successful, and Ukrainian government and Russian government, they reached agreement on certain major points. Like Ukrainian government, for instance, offered Ukraine to be neutral, accepted a demand from Russia for neutrality of Ukraine, which means non-NATO membership and so on. They also discussed other solution to other kind of parts of this conflict, in particular guarantees that Russia would not launch new invasion and so on. And so there was a real possibility of peaceful resolution of this conflict at the end of March, and beginning of April. But everything changed after a visit from British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who arrived in Kyiv, the capital, without any basic announcement, even warning to Zelensky. He was, according to Ukrainian media, he came almost without any prior announcement, and he met with Zelensky and told him, according to Ukrainian media, which relies on access from office of Zelensky, from his senior advisors, who basically leaks this information. And Boris Johnson told Zelensky openly, there is no point of negotiations with Putin. Ukraine has to win this war militarily, and even if Zelensky would try to reach agreement with Putin on his own, Western governments would not support such a peace deal. So this meant basically that after this, negotiations basically became over and they stopped, and there was no progress at all and no possibility of negotiations again taking place. So that's why this was a very crucial issue, and this means that Boris Johnson was speaking not only on his own behalf, he was speaking on behalf of all Western governments, including Canada, but I think most importantly, United States. So United States is crucial, has crucial role in this conflict, and since Ukraine became de facto client state of the United States, and U.S. government has a role in not only it supported violent overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014, it also has a say and involvement in deciding which policies for Ukraine to pursue, which government appointments to have. For instance, Prime Minister and key ministers' positions in Ukraine were done with involvement of U.S. government officials, and including Vice President Biden, according to leaked phone conversations between him and President of Ukraine, and according to Ukrainian media reports, also Western governments told the leadership of Ukraine not to use military force in Crimea during Russian annexation, but they supported the use of military force in Donbass, and they now have still a very strong influence on Zelensky. Another reason for failure of negotiations, or not likely to happen in any future, is the role of far right. And now far right are small in Ukraine; they are not numerically strong, and Ukraine is not Nazi state. There is no Nazi government, no Nazi military, contrary to Russian government claim. But there is very influential far right, and they have their own military units like neo-Nazi-led Azov battalion and so on, regiment, and they have very strong influence on policy of Ukraine, in particular Zelensky, because they threaten Zelensky against making any peace deal with Russia. Even at the start of the war, basically he faced not only Russian invasion, but also he faced threat from far right and pressure from the Western governments, which means that Zelensky actually is quite weak leader of Ukraine, because he actually acted not in interest of Ukraine. He acted basically under pressure from far right, from the West, and from which had their own interest to use Ukraine specifically to achieve their own goals. So in this case, I'm skeptical about any negotiations. And I think this will be very difficult for Ukraine because such peace deal at the end of March was would have much better term for Ukraine that can happen now, because Russia now would try to capture as much territory of Ukraine as it managed.
Couple of people who got
And
hands up.
I think that that's the importance of getting your kind of message out to a wider Canadian and American audience, to say that, you know, I don't think most Canadians understand that we're in a proxy war with Russia, and that we're from a geopolitical perspective, we're sort of using Ukraine and Ukrainians to, you know, weaken a geopolitical competitor. And so I think that you know, raising that issue is one of the steps towards putting some political pressure on Canadian and American, British politicians to change their posture in terms of their hostility towards negotiations. So that's one of the steps towards you know, getting out of the horrors that that Ukrainians are facing. But so I thanks a lot, Ivan, for that very insightful and detailed discussion. There's a lot more that we could get into. I try to keep this to an hour. It's called the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour for a reason. But I thanks a lot for coming on, and thanks everyone for staying on till the end here. And next week, same place, same time. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.